This is Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague.
Nomar, thank you so much for joining me today on Somewhere in the Skies.
It's an absolute pleasure. Love the show. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, thanks, man. I read your book and I knew immediately I had to have you on. This is an area that I haven't covered often on my show. So when I learned that you not only lived in the Maine area, but that you had so many stories from there that you've collected, it was unlike anything I'd ever known about this area of the United States. So first and foremost, I'm super excited to talk to you today. But before we even get to your book, I want to ask, like I do most of my guests, what is your origin story if we're going to go the comic book route? How did you get involved with UFOs?
Well, it started 36 years ago or so. I think it was, 82, 83, something like that. And I was 4 or 5 years old, and I had a sighting of my own in Fort Kent. Fort Kent is at the tip of Maine. You can literally throw a rock and hit Canada. And it was late winter, and I was sound asleep, and a clap of thunder woke me up. And I could hear like tapping of rain hitting the windows. I was seeing flashes of light, and I was like, oh, a thunder and lightning storm. So I kneeled up in bed and I wanted to watch the storm. So after a little bit, I saw this really thick lightning bolt penetrate a cloud. And if I asked you to draw a lightning bolt, you'd probably draw like this thick, jagged yellow line, or maybe think the charging indicator on your smartphone. Mm-hmm. Like that is what I saw, and I still remember it to this day. It's a lightning bolt stuck in a cloud, and there was electricity coming off of it, and there were loud booms happening, and then eventually I drifted off to sleep. I woke up the next morning. I went to the bathroom. When I was walking back to my room, I could see out my bedroom windows, and the lightning bolt was still there. And even at that age, I knew that, lightning lasts less than a second, so I was very confused by it. I ran downstairs. I got my dad. I brought him up to show him the lightning bolt, and it was gone. I tried explaining to him what I saw, and all he could really do was kind of like ruffle my hair like adults do. And they're like, yeah, when a kid's trying to explain something to him. But I guess I was pretty animated and insistent during my explanation, where he did make sure to tell me that it did not rain the night before. So after that, it actually scared me because I had no idea what it was. Well, 2 weeks later, had another like nighttime encounter, but this one was a bit more realistic and fantastic. Really, my dad dragged my sister and I out of bed to view the Northern Lights. It's the only time I've seen them, and they're gorgeous and really strange. But the reason I mentioned that as well is that both of those experiences taught me at a very young age that the world is mysterious and strange, and I was kind of hooked at that moment for all things weird. But I was also still scared, But as I got older, that lightning bolt, I really think it was the first time I saw a UFO. I still remember it as a lightning bolt, so who knows? But that's kind of the origin of where all this started.
Wow, man. This like strikingly mirrors my own dive into this whole world. So it's really interesting to hear that. And it's kind of unlike most aerial anomalies we've ever heard here in the UFO field of people getting involved. Usually it's saucers or triangles, but you saw a freaking lightning bolt in the sky that did not go away. That's very interesting. Wow. Well, today we're sort of going to, besides lightning bolts in the sky, we're going to cover many different encounters that people have had in the Maine area. You recently released your book, Otherworldly Encounters, Evidence of UFO Sightings and Abductions, where you focus mainly on cases in Maine, the New England area. So I have to ask, before we get into some of those, what made you want to primarily focus on these areas?
Well, New England has a long history of hauntings, even Sasquatch and other cryptids like the Dover Demon. There's been some dogman sightings. I actually talked to a dogman witness about a month and a half ago from Maine, and turns out there's also a ton of extraterrestrial encounters. And I love my home state of Maine, and I figured if all of this is getting reported in my own backyard, what better place to start and really stay for as long as I can, sharing these untold stories. Like why wouldn't I catalog those and make some sort of history with them,
Absolutely. I mean, we have the famous cases throughout the world.
Sure.
We've got, one of the first abduction encounters ever recorded up in New Hampshire area.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's these untold stories, these voices that haven't got out there that I think are most important to the field. There's so many witnesses and people having experiences that we haven't heard from, and to give them that voice, I think, is extremely important, and I'm so happy you've done that. Well, in terms of that, you not only did you record alien encounters and UFO sightings, but you're also a paranormal investigator. I found that really interesting, and you were able to kind of mix your methods of investigation when applying it to UFO research and the paranormal. So I was wondering, maybe before we get into some of the actual cases you covered, how did you do this? How were you able to do this? So many people aren't able to branch over and make these worlds of the paranormal and UFOs connect, but you were able to do that with your investigative skills. So maybe could you give us a little hint on how you were able to do this?
Yeah, sure. Some of it is really simple, meaning, I'm the quintessential struggling writer, so I don't have all these assets to play around with. However, I do have a little bit of a paranormal bag of tricks from my haunting investigations, and I figured maybe I could use some of those in these extraterrestrial cases. Also, in some of these cases, people have reported strange happenings inside their homes that certainly come across more haunting in nature, either after a UFO sighting or concurrent with UFO sightings. So typically after an encounter, I've talked to people about these encounters, and it's really about knowing your surroundings, talking to people, and utilizing some of the same gear like we were just talking about. So K2 meters to check the area and the home for any out-of-place readings. One could assume that UFOs maybe emit some sort of electromagnetic field, but it's also really about ruling out the high concentrations of EMF that could influence people through hallucination or paranoid thoughts, right, which is an extreme symptom of high EMF exposure. So that's really a way to help debunk some of this. I also conduct EVP sessions. You just never know what is inaudible to us at the moment, of course, and it could prove interesting on listening back. I'm actually working with a couple right now. They're having ongoing current extraterrestrial activities. In fact, they sent me some pictures even last night. There was a lot of activity on their property, and they have caught some EVPs. They'll just switch on the recorder at night and then go to bed. And at one point, they caught this strange metallic noise in their room, and it almost sounds like a street bus, like braking. You get that screech. And then there's another EVP that clearly says the word Earth. That's freaking weird, but in regards to knowing the area, though, I want to know if there are high tension wires nearby or what was on the area previously. And, what could that mean? I like to know the terrain too. Like if I'm going to conduct an investigation, I kind of want to know what I'm getting myself into, safety first. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, interviewing people for me is more of a conversation. I want to hear their story. I want to pay attention. I ask follow-up questions so I know the whole story. And then I follow up with, if anything seemed out of the ordinary the day of, the week of, or the month of, if there was something leading up to it they hadn't thought about previously, and then obviously any history with, them or family members with odd experiences or encounters. It all helps to paint a broader picture.
Absolutely. I've never really thought about that. What could sort of bookend these primary experiences these people are having? Something previous to it, something after it. That's really interesting. The follow-up, I think, is most important when conducting these investigations and interviews is on the news we see a UFO event covered and then we never hear about it again. But, things can happen after that. And I think it's very important to do that follow-up because this could be a string of events that continue for sure. So
absolutely. And I don't want them to feel abandoned. Oh, I got what I needed from you.
Right.
I want to help them. They're all too often they have nobody to turn to. And if I could at least be a sympathetic, non-judgmental ear, I'm down for that,
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. Well, let's sort of dive into some of the stuff you covered in the book.
Sure.
We mentioned, UFOs and the paranormal sort of mixing. In chapter 2 of your book, you brought up perhaps one of the first ever paranormal investigators in the U.S. here. That was Reverend Abraham Cummings. And this is a story that really seems to mix the two. So I was wondering maybe if you could briefly run us through this incident and what you think it may being the key word, have represented.
Yeah, man. I love this story, first of all. So Reverend Abraham Cummings, he was a smart dude. He was highly educated, and he had an interest in understanding paranormal phenomena. So during this time frame, which is 1806, he was investigating a case in the town of Sullivan, Maine. And it was about a ghost of a woman named Nellie Butler. And apparently, most of the town either heard or saw Nellie in some capacity, which is wild. And one night while Cummings was walking around town, these two guys came up to him and they said that they had just had this ghostly encounter in a field. And they told Cummings that they saw this odd glowing light hovering over the field. Well, I'm reading this and red flags are immediately going off. I'm like, glowing light hovering over a field, that sounds like a UFO sighting. So, I continue to read and Cummings wrote that he went to check it out. And he said that he saw what the men did, but he described it as a, quote, white rock. And it was actually on the field itself. So that sounds to me like a landed craft. And then it ascends. While it's in the air, check this out, he observes a small entity coming out of it and floats down. So again, my red flags are going off. I'm like, whoa, is this an alien encounter? An alien being encounter? And he says that he spoke telepathically to it and actually assumed that it was Nellie Butler. But he was confused because the entity was, quote unquote, child-sized. Again, red flags, gray aliens, child-sized. That's how they're always described. So just as he had that thought, the entity then shape-shifted to a larger size and appeared female. That's crazy. And they talked briefly, and without warning, Cummings found himself back inside his home, not knowing how he got there.
Oh, whoa,
and he
okay.
Yeah. So now we're talking missing time. Was there some sort of abduction? What's going on? This reads like some classic abduction scenarios. Think Travis Walton, then he just mysteriously appears on the side of the road. Things like that, not knowing how he got there. And so in my opinion, it very much sounds like a UFO alien abduction type scenario. What did you think after reading it?
I thought the same thing. I mean, there were too many red flags, to be honest. And immediately, I think what really caught my attention was the entity part of it all. How small it was, that it sort of, descended from the craft. I mean, what I found most interesting is it's the perception of the person having the experience that can really shape what it could have been. I mean, we could both come to the conclusion that it might have been alien, but who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, if Michael Moore could read this and he thinks there's some sort of collusion with the government, who knows? Like you said, it's all about perception, and that's really interesting that you said that because at this time, his mind and that town's mind were all wrapped around ghostly encounters, exactly. and he kept using the term specter in describing this. He just didn't have another word for it. It's interesting.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and that sort of continued with some of the other stories you found that happened very early on. We have a lot of modern contemporary cases where you start to see it being perceived much more as alien as we kind of advance with our own technology, our fears in the world at the time. Stuff, sci-fi becomes very influential on a lot of these cases as we move forward. But this one that you cover in chapter 3 also really caught my attention. And that was the story of Laura Dent. This one scared the crap crap out of me, dude. Would you mind running us through this one?
You know what's interesting is that this case pissed me off at first. and I'll tell you why. The first time I heard about it was when I was watching an episode of Hangar One, MUFON show that they had for a bit on History Channel.
Yep.
And I was pissed because I had not heard about the encounter before. It was only the show. So I was really mad at myself for not finding it in my research because, like you said, it's terrifying and there's so many different aspects to it. But whatever, I got over it and I had to know everything I could about the case. So I contacted MUFON, and this was a couple of years ago now, and I got in touch with Valerie Schultz. Valerie Schultz is the Maine state director of MUFON. She's a school teacher up in northern Maine, just a lovely woman. And it turns out that she was the investigator assigned to this case. So we talked at length about it, and she told me the witness refused to speak with me. Could only do it through Valerie. So the witness stated that this all started in the early 80s when she was about 8 years old or so, and it began with their farmhouse being engulfed in light at night. That's really all that she saw at the beginning. But it was so frequent, and she could never find the source that she started to talk to her parents about it. But kind of like my dad in my story, they dismissed her, Until one day, though, she found a crop circle, by chance, in her father's hayfield. And she showed it to him, and he really came across as distressed about the crop circle and immediately mowed the area, so it was indiscernible from the other grass in the field. So the next day, she said she was home alone, and a black sedan drove up her road, parked, and two men dressed in black suits got out. She said that they walked to the area of the field where the crop circle had been, which obviously surprised her because the father mowed it the day previously. So again, it was indiscernible from all the other mowed grass. And she said they took soil and grass samples, put them in small jars, and then bounced. So a few nights later, the light came on again, and she saw that it was focused more over the field. Well, she started sleeping with binoculars, and so she grabbed her binoculars, went to the window to try to get a better look, and she said that the light dimmed finally, and she saw what she described as a silver disc shaped craft, and it had windows, and it was landed on the field. She said that she also saw these shadow things moving about the field, and kept watching. And eventually she said that they looked like gray alien beings. And she said that she was aware of these gray aliens through media that she had consumed. So she didn't get specific. So I don't know if she saw the Betty and Barney Hill movie, TV movie at the time or whatever, because that came out close to this time frame. But according to Valerie, the witness did go on to explain that the abductions started around this time. So obviously she's an adult now and claims that the abductions are still happening, but remembers very little of them. And really the only thing she had to say about the abductions, because she can't remember very much, is when she was a child, they were more fun and welcoming and nice in nature. And now that she's an adult, she feels as though they're more malevolent in nature. So a pretty stark contrast there. But that's pretty much that story in a nutshell.
Yeah, that one really, really got to me. Well, the next one I want to sort of fast forward to is in Chapter 11. Now, so many people that I talk to, when they know that I'm into all this stuff, they always ask, what do you think of Mothman? What do you think of Mothman? And it is, admittedly my favorite cryptid of all time. And in Chapter 11 of your book, this is titled The Creature of Washington Street, you chronicle what could be considered maybe a Mothman-like string of encounters in Camden, Maine. So, being my favorite cryptid of all time, man, I have to ask you, I'd love to hear more about this and your personal investigations that you did on the Mothman of Maine.
Yeah. So I love Mothman 2. I'm also a huge fan of the Fresno Nightcrawler. That thing freaks me out. But anyway, I had heard of this encounter through my research, but it was really hard to track down the full story. I kept finding the headline to the story. Man sees Mothman-like creature in Maine. Man sees Mothman. And I'm like, what the hell? Why can't I find this story? So I asked a fellow author and researcher. Her name's Michelle Solier. And she was actually able to track down a witness name. So this was amazing. I contact the witness via Facebook, and it was a bit awkward because a lot of people had the same name. And, I had to describe a little bit of why I was contacting them. So after some awkward interactions, I actually found the dude, and he was willing to talk about the encounter. We talked over the course of like 2 weeks, and after a week or so, he saw like how serious I was about pursuing this and finding everything out I could about it, that he still wanted to share his story, but he wanted to remain anonymous. And I did write that in the book, that he preferred to remain anonymous, and I named him Robert Osborne in the book. But it all started in 2001, which was actually 35 years to the month of the original Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966. So kind of synchronistic there. But he was walking home early one evening down Washington Street in Camden, Maine. Camden is a gorgeous little coastal town. Think a Stephen King town, and with some horror actually because of this encounter. And as he was walking, he began hearing like this loud chirping or squeaking noise, like a mouse. So he's looking down, trying not to step on the friggin' thing. And while he's looking down, he sees this shadow kind of go by, and he knows that it's the shadow of something above him. So he looks up, and he sees this really odd-looking humanoid figure with a massive wingspan, and it was making the sound. He said that the body was like 4.5 feet long, and it had these large translucent wings. And he said it flew right up and over the apartment building that he lived in. And as it did that, he was able to get a good measurement of the wings, because he said it spanned from one side of the eaves of his building to the other side of the eaves. Yeah, so huge. I went down there in June of last year, or maybe April of last year, and he gave me the address, and sure enough, that building is from eave to eave is 25 feet. So you're talking about something like the size of a Cessna, wingspan wise. Like, that's crazy. But anyways, it flew off to this marshy area behind the building. He talked to friends and family about it, and it's not really like they didn't believe he saw something. They just thought he misidentified something like a turkey vulture or a sandhill crane or something, and both of those can be found in the area. And then he started having these reoccurring dreams. And he said that he would find himself on that same spot on Washington Street where he saw the figure. And instead of that large winged creature above him, he saw a UFO as large as a house, and it would roar and take off, and then he would wake up. So, as researchers, like you are and myself and others, I just asked him, I was like, that seemed like a dream, or was it more like a memory? Tell me more about that. Right. And he's like, interesting, you should bring that up. I tell people it's a dream, but I believe it's a memory. And so I thought that was interesting, and also synchronistic with the Mothman sightings in 1966 in Point Pleasant, where there were concurrent UFO sightings as well, along with this winged creature, So he had a couple of other encounters throughout the years, and he's married now, living in southern Maine, and he started having some reoccurring dreams again that were UFO in nature. He would see this UFO hovering above the tree line, and then he would wake up. So I after talking to him, I obviously wanted to go down there and check it out for myself. So I went to the marshy area that's behind his building. It's probably a quarter mile behind his building, and it turns out that there's a dirt road that leads down there, and there's a bit of an open area where you can park. I wouldn't call it a parking lot at all, but it's certainly a flat enough space that you can park there. So before I did that, I actually went to the local PD, explained to them what Mothman was, what I was doing there, about the encounter. And in places in Camden, you're not allowed to be there after sunset. So I didn't, want to get hassled or anything. So I asked their permission, and they're like, "All right, weirdo, go for it." So
I was going to ask what their response was to that.
Yeah, they were just like, whatever. You seem nice enough. Go ahead. So I really just, staked out the area. I don't know how to friggin' investigate Mothman, so I brought with me a night vision camera and a flashlight, So,
good, yeah.
I mean, fair enough, right? So I'm sitting there, and there's just so much noise. There's so much wildlife in the area that you couldn't really discern, a deer walking to a humanoid figure with wings walking, and it was pitch black. But I did have the night vision camera. try. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I probably spent 3 or 4 hours there. Didn't really see or catch anything, so I went back to the hotel. Well, the next night, I went out again. I brought my little dude with me, and we're out there, and I'm bringing him up to speed. He was 11 at the time. I'm bringing him up to speed on who Mothman is. We watched the trailer to the Mothman prophecies, and he's eating Sour Patch Kids, and we're just chilling, and he's a bit freaked out, because we got the windows down, and we're sitting really in the middle of the woods in front of this marshy area and looking for Mothman, So he kept telling me that he could see these red eyes. I'm so sorry that I live next to a church and the bell's going off.
Oh, that is so appropriate and cool. Don't worry about it, man.
All right. So, and he kept telling me that he was seeing these red eyes, and they were about 7-8 feet in the air. I was like, okay. So it was like 4 or 5 times. Every time I would look, I wouldn't see anything. Like the final time he says it, I look over quick enough and I see it for myself. I take a picture. Of course, nothing came out very well, and I just don't know what to make of that. It looked like these close together red eyes. I don't know if he was being, influenced by the Mothman Prophecies trailer, where it definitely focuses on the red eyes. And where we were parked, we don't know Camden that well, so there could have been this road nearby that we didn't know, and we're seeing brake lights maybe. So I'm not really sure what it was, but it was interesting that we did see something, and I certainly plan on going back and checking it out some more,
Absolutely. First of all, coolest dad ever. Second of all, I mean, it's good to hear, and it's refreshing to hear that you discern what it could be. I think that's a problem a lot of investigators have, is they're immediately going to, I saw Mothman.
Right.
Like,
there's nothing more that I wanted to say is that, yes, I saw Mothman, but nah, that wouldn't be right.
It's not your job, man. I mean, your job is to find every other answer before Mothman. And I think that's what the misconception about paranormal investigation, cryptid hunting, UFO hunting is. We're not out to say, look, aliens. We're there to find every other reasonable explanation. When we're left with nothing else, that's when we really have to ask the tough questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Even to yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
And that can be the hardest sometimes,
I'm Ryan Sprague.
And I'm Andrew Sanford.
And we love pro wrestling.
It's the best.
Headlocks, elbow drops,
scathing promos, and chair shots.
We just can't get enough of it. So we started a podcast.
You can join Ryan and me as we dig into the ins and outs of pro wrestling like the rabid fans we are.
We've got interviews, previews, predictions, news, and so much more. And we're going to cover all of it on Somewhere in the Ring.
Oh, yeah.
Is that supposed to be Macho Man?
Nope, no good.
We'll work on it. Join us every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts, for all new episodes. And we'll see you somewhere in the ring.
Somewhere in the Ring is part of the eOne Podcast Network.
Well, you were boots on the ground, you got out there, you investigated this case. You did this with other people as well. And that's what I really respect about your work, is you're willing to go and meet people face to face to hear their stories. Now, this is what my whole approach is in the UFO field as well, is the human side of it. Being face to face with these people and hearing their stories. And that's what you did with another one that I read in the book. This was The Woman That Time Forgot. I was wondering maybe if you wouldn't mind telling us a little about your personal experiences with this one as well.
Yeah. And I agree. When you meet a witness and hear them tell their story, you really get a more genuine experience. You get to see the look in their eyes, their body language, the tone in their voice, and it's powerful. And powerful in the sense of, this fool's lying. I definitely believe that this person believes it, or wow, aliens exist, y'all, and this person experienced them. Right. That's rare, but it does happen. So yeah, this woman, her name is Sue. I met her last year, and she told me of some missing time that she experienced along with a UFO encounter. And it was her entire family that experienced the missing time. This happened back in 1991, and it was right around 9 p.m. Her kids were downstairs about to watch a movie. She was upstairs getting ready for bed with her husband, and they were also going to watch a movie upstairs. So she was getting dressed for bed, and she saw this odd light outside her window. She showed it to her husband, and they were both a bit surprised by it and decided to go outside for a better look. So as they came downstairs, the kids were like, what the hell are you guys doing? Going outside. And they're like, there's this weird light outside. Like, come with us and check it out. So all four of them pile out to the front porch, and they're leaning over to the far right because that's where the light is. And as they're watching it, the light then shoots to right in front of them and lower in the sky. So they're just there, jaw dropped, and they're watching it for about 5 minutes or so, and then it just blinks out. So they go back inside, and the kids were like, yo, this movie's over. And Sue, the mom, she was like, what are you guys talking about? No way. And she's like, no, look, the credits are on. And she's like, what? So she went and checked the clock and found that it was 11 p.m. and realized that the entire family lost about 2 hours of time. And obviously everybody was like kind of shocked by it, but no one really wanted to talk about it, which I can understand, but very, very odd experience. And then she started having these weird dreams. So dreams is kind of like a pattern in some of these stories. And this dream is really weird. She said it was just her and her husband, and they're on this spaceship. That's how she described it. And everything inside of it is white, except for these windows that are there, and they can see the stars through the windows. And she said that they got into this elevator and went down to this other area. And when the doors opened, she said it looked like a Walmart that was all white. Everything inside of it was white. It was filled with clothes. And all the clothes were white, and half of them were her size and half of them were his size, her husband's size. And what's really strange is that anytime her husband spoke or opened his mouth in the dream, a Pink Floyd song would play.
I'm sorry.
I know, it's friggin' weird. So this really, she was never a fan of Pink Floyd, so she started listening to a lot of them to try to figure out what the hell the song was. And it turns out it was the song Interstellar Overdrive. Very long song. It's a good song, but long and not something you normally hear on the radio very often. Mm-hmm. But on the morning that she was driving over to meet me to have this discussion, she said that song was on the radio. And so the synchronicity of that was certainly not lost on us. But so she goes on to tell me that she needed to have some x-rays done. This was like a year or so later after the missing time. And she had some x-rays done for this, unrelated medical issue. And she said that there were 3 metal spheres in the shape of a triangle in her hip. And the doctor said to her when they went to discuss the x-rays, he goes, when were you abducted by aliens? Well, of course, audibly she laughed it off, but in her head she was freaking out, like, oh my God, what? And then he seriously asked her, like, were you shot by buckshot or something? Well, there's no scars or anything in her hip to account for those spheres. So she kind of reached out to some friends and some of them suggested to get them removed and things like that. She ultimately decided not to. But a couple of years after that, she had more x-rays done. And it turns out that the spheres are now gone. So very, very odd. And she contacted the original doctor because it was a different set of doctors that did the second set of x-rays. And she wanted to get copies of those x-rays from her original doctor. Well, the original doctor claimed that those x-rays somehow are missing now or got lost.
Of course, yeah.
Of course they did. So that's pretty much a story in a nutshell. There was another bout of missing time in 94, 95, 96, something like that. And she was out walking with her husband at the time. And they decided to go 2 separate ways. They were searching for antlers. Her ex-husband created furniture with antlers they would find in the forest. So they were out doing that, and they were only supposed to be gone for an hour and a half. Well, Sue thought she was gone for about an hour and a half, but it turns out she was gone for 4 hours and has no recollection of what happened to that missing time, you know. But what struck me about her, though, is that she was just such a sweet woman, had nothing to gain, never sought anything out, you know, financial about it, very extremely sincere. But at the end of our meeting, Ryan, she looked at me and it was like a movie, dude. Like her eyes were welled up with tears, and she looked at me and was like, "Why me?" It broke my friggin' heart, you know, and I had no answers for her other than, I'm going to share your story, and at the very least, somebody else who had a strange encounter may read it and not feel so alone. You know, at the very least, I might be able to provide that to you. But I mean, it was just sad, though, you know?
Absolutely, man. I've come across that time and time. One of my chapter titles is Why Me? So many of these people ask that question of the investigator, of the researcher, and we don't have an answer for them. We can't, you know? That's not really our job. It's, like you said, as interviewers, we're there to record the story and make sure that we get it down so that we can bring that to the public and find other people who may have some sort of connections with them. So I can only imagine what you were feeling at that time, you know, when they confide so much in you. Of course they want some answers, but it's hard. It's hard. I've been in that situation where they're crying or they're in such a vulnerable place. So why me is a good question, and I think that's one we continue to ask as well with all of these, and the story will continue for her. I'm sure. Yeah. Hopefully she can find just some sort of closure in getting the story out there. I think that's what's most important. Well, another one I kind of want to cover with you here, man, is on Loring Air Force Base. Now, this has a pretty rich history, I've now learned, about with UFOs, and some I didn't really know about. So I was wondering maybe if you could give us a little backstory on this base and its connections to UFOs and what you personally experienced there.
Yeah, man, I love the Loring Air Force Base encounters. There's a few different encounters that the base has had, and if you talk to people from the area, they'll say there's hundreds of encounters that have happened there. So that's quite a bit. But Loring Air Force Base, it was operational in Maine from 1947. That's an interesting year to 1994, and it housed nuclear weapons during the 60s and 70s. In 1975, a series of encounters happened over the course of 3 days where a UFO was hovering over the base in different areas, including where they kept the nukes. This was seen on radar and visually, and included in the visual sightings was the wing commander, who was the highest ranking officer on site during that time. He saw it with his eyes too. And it seemed to culminate on this third night when the UFO was seen hovering just a few feet over the runway. The Maine State Police and Air Force Police rushed to the area, and they were just all dumbfounded at what they were looking at. They described this oval-shaped object that looked like lava or something was flowing all around it with all these different colors. And then after a few moments, it just blinked out. Seconds later, it was picked up on radar over in Nova Scotia. And it was also claimed – this is a bit anecdotal, but it was also claimed by one of the sons of the officers on site that night that the Men in Black went there the next day and confiscated reports about the incident. What's not anecdotal, though, is in 1982, a couple of journalists looked into the case and actually contacted the FBI in Massachusetts. And granted, this is 7 years later, and they said that the encounter is listed as unknown and the investigation is still ongoing. That's very interesting that the FBI would admit to that to these journalists, you know?
Yeah, really.
So in 1964, 11 years prior to this, there was a similar encounter at Loring. An air policeman claimed to have seen a dark-colored UFO hovering just a few feet above the runway, but it wasn't, all lava and colored lights. Instead, it was like this black matte finish with all these angles, he was saying. And the airman actually confirmed his sighting with another airman who was even closer. And that second airman said that it like blurred and then disappeared. It's a very odd way to describe that. And he talked about another colleague of his who was on duty one night in December of 64. and he was doing his rounds and all that good stuff. And he saw some people walking by a snowbank near the B-52 bombers area that he said were outfitted with nukes at the time, just in case they needed to be called into action. The airman said that he shouted for these people to come out. No one's allowed over there. And they wouldn't respond back to him, so he fired off a warning shot. And he said that they eventually made their way out. And when the airman saw them in front of him, he said he was terrified at their appearance and immediately fired his gun at them. He said as soon as he did this, they vanished. And then just a moment or two later, the base came to life. Lights came on. Other air police personnel came to the site and actually apprehended this guy's colleague. And he tried explaining, what happened and all that stuff to the superiors, but they didn't want to hear any of it. He was relieved of duty for firing shots near the nukes, which is crazy. Yeah. And a couple months later, the original airman who was telling all these stories said that they were at a local bar with some friends, and that this guy who was relieved of duty walked in, and they started poking fun at him and stuff like, "Hey, you seen green little men?" and blah blah blah. And he walked up to them and said, "They're gray, not green." and then bounced. Again, a bit anecdotal at the end there, but I actually went up myself to check out Loring. And Loring, as it stands right now, is literally an abandoned Air Force base. There's miles of runway. There's like 40 or 50 hangars, all abandoned. There's two large housing areas straight out of the friggin' Walking Dead, man. They're all dilapidated, and weeds are cracking the pavement. All the hangars are bleeding rust. It's crazy. And you can kind of have your run of the base. On the peripheral of the base, there are some businesses. There's a call center with like 1,000 employees. There's museums. There's a couple other businesses. And what's interesting is that the Department of Defense actually has an accounting department there. So I wonder if they got some of that Pentagon paperwork from 07 to 12 there. But it's interesting to say the least. But again, when I got to the area, though, I contacted the local PD. I actually just walked right into the station. I was like, "Yo, here's what I'm doing, UFOs, blah, blah, blah." And they're like, "Okay, have fun." So they were totally cool with me going there. So I went during the day first. I wanted to kind of get the lay of the land and know where I wanted to go when I went back there at night. All the sightings at Loring happened at night, so I figured that's probably a good time to be there. I ended up hanging out at the base for a while during the day. I took hundreds of pictures and explored everything. I even went maybe about 100 miles an hour on the runway because you can.
Nice.
So
I've done
fun.
the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyways, I went back to the hotel, took a nap, and I came back at night. And as soon as I got to the base, boom, I was lost. The base was so dark. I don't know why I thought there'd be lights or whatever, but there's just no power. So it's completely dark. So I didn't know where the hell I was. And surprisingly, Google Maps works there. So I was able to get my bearings, and I was able to find this hangar I wanted to go to and the route to the runway and stuff like that. So the first thing I did was go to the runways. You have a complete unobstructed view of the sky, and not to mention the runway that's where there were a couple encounters with UFOs just hovering over the runway. Mm-hmm. So I was there for about an hour and a half, and it was kind of drizzly that night. So I'm sitting in the car, and no lights are on. The rain is starting to sound like friggin' white noise, and I'm getting a headache. I'm like, this is bullshit. So I start the car, and I get out, and I have a cigarette, and I'm just trying to get my wits about me when I start hearing something or someone walking up the runway. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I don't know if I'm ready to meet an alien yet. You know what I mean? But I have my, I'm ready. But so I'm sitting there or I'm standing there, and I'm trying to hear what's coming towards me, and I'm straining to see in the darkness because you can't see your hand in front of your face. It's that dark. And so I move into the front of the car to try to get closer to the sound. And as I'm standing there, it's getting closer, but it sounds like it takes a couple steps, then stops. Take a couple steps, then stops. Then I realized it's my windshield wipers on an intermittent setting. Yeah. So I was like, oh my God, I'm going insane. I'm going insane. It's 1:00 in the morning. I'm on this abandoned Air Force base with supposed alien encounters. Like, what the hell am I doing? So I get in the car and I drive to the radar tower area. And I park in the parking lot of the radar tower, shut everything off, start watching the sky again. And I'm watching, and maybe 5 minutes, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes, there's a light in the sky. And Ryan, it just got really – I was a human in that moment. I wasn't, Nomar, the investigator, looking for UFOs. I was like, holy shit, what the hell is that? And I'm watching it, and I'm awestruck, and I'm not even thinking about cameras or anything. And I look down, and I'm holding my cell phone. I have gear with me. It's in the passenger seat. I look down, I'm holding my cell phone. I'm like, oh shit, and I turn on the camera to start recording in a huff,
Yeah.
So I record this light in the sky, and then I get the dumb idea that I want to get closer. I don't know if I'm trying to get underneath it or what, but I want to get closer to it. So I start the car, and I drive maybe 5 feet, something like that. And as soon as I do that, the light does this weird flickering, swirly type thing, and then it blinks out. So I have maybe like 20 seconds of it on camera. You can see it on my YouTube channel. Just do a search for Nomar Slevik and then look for the Lauren Air Force Base UFO, because that's literally what it is, an unidentified flying object. I'm not saying it's extraterrestrial in any way. It's just interesting that in 1964, some people saw stuff. In 1975, some people saw stuff. I go there on a whim in 2017, and I saw something, So kind of interesting.
And I mean, investigations, there's false starts, that sometimes nothing ever happens. And that's a part of it. That's part of the whole experience. I mean, all these TV shows and whatnot give the skewed perception of what investigations actually are about. But that human side of it, like you said, of not having your gear ready or this or that, like that happens all the time. You forget that, I should probably be recording this. Like, that's just not how everyone always asks, all the debunkers, skeptics are like, why didn't you just videotape it? Or why didn't you, everyone has cell phones now, why didn't you just take pictures? Because that's not what you're thinking of at that moment,
That's right.
You want to experience it in real time and as human as possible, and you're vulnerable at that moment. You don't know what's going to happen. What if that light you saw started coming down at you and shot some beam Travis Walton style? Like, you wouldn't. Yeah. You don't think about those things at the time. We have this inherent nature of thinking that whatever is happening around us is a threat. That's just human nature, is to defend yourself rather than, let me show this to the world,
Right.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, I mean, dude, you have covered so much in the book in terms of stories, in terms of going out and investigate. So I want to ask you, before we wrap things up here, as an investigator and a relayer of stories, what advice would you give to people maybe starting to get into the field of UFO studies, UFO research? What advice would you give them on how to go about that, what to expect, and what sort of the misconceptions are out there about ufology, as it were?
Yeah, I would say to talk to people first, look into your local area, see if there's anyone investigating and seeing if they're willing to talk or meet with you to discuss what they do. So many investigators are just like chill, genuine people that are willing to share, especially because they could use the friggin' help, and also always be learning. Never think you friggin' know everything. Read, check out books from others who've done it. Books by Steiger, Clark, Coleman, Keel, Redfern, even Cohen, Friedman, on and on and on. So many good books out there. And it's always good to brush up on some history, And I think lastly with misconceptions, one thing, like when you're in the thick of an overnight investigation, just like we were talking about, it can be boring. Hours go by without incident. The entire investigation may go by without incident, nothing will happen. And that's okay though. It's all right. You're out there. It's boots in the field. And just because something didn't happen doesn't mean that this person was lying. And just because something didn't happen doesn't mean the person was telling the truth. You were there with your own perceptions, trying to have your own experience, and that in itself is worth documenting as well, but those are my thoughts on that anyway.
This is a very personal phenomenon, and I think that's important too. We're all trying to, while we want to help witnesses and find answers for the public at large, it's a very personal experience, and everyone's going to take what they want from it. So I couldn't put it better myself. The book is Otherworldly Encounters, Evidence of UFO Sightings and Abductions. Nomar, where can we find the book?
You can find it wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that good stuff. My publisher, Llewellyn Worldwide Publishing, they have a far reach, so it's available everywhere. One thing I do like to promote, though, I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but indiebound.org, I-N-D-I-E, bound.org is a search engine for mom and pop bookstores. So you go there, you type in your zip code, and then once it brings up all the mom and pop stores in your area, you then search for the book that you want. If they don't have it, they can order it. But I think it's a good way to help keep mom and pop bookstores going, Yes. So order from them and all that good stuff. And then people, if they just want to send me a message, say hi, or tell me I'm an idiot, they can hit me up on facebook.com/Nomar Slevik author.
Yes, support your local bookstores. Support Nomar's work. Dude, I highly respect what you're doing. I'm so happy I came across it. It's so eye-opening to read a book about cases I'd never heard about before. The more stories I hear, the more invigorated I become, searching, as you have, for those answers that seem to just be a little beyond our grasp. But it's people like you who give me hope that we're going to grab the truth someday. Never let go of it. So keep looking up, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Ryan, thanks so much. It was an honor, truly, to be on the show. I appreciate it.
Somewhere in the Skies is produced by Third Kind Productions in association with the Entertainment One podcast network.
Hey everyone, Ryan Sprague here, host of Somewhere in the Skies. If you've ever thought about supporting us, we have great 2 easy options for you right now. If you listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, you can click the subscribe button at the top of your Apple feed. Or you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/somewhereskies. Both of these options give you the same benefits: early access to the main show, bonus episodes and content, and priority to ask our guests your listener questions. So, to help support Somewhere in the Skies, click that subscribe button on Apple or visit patreon.com/somewhereskies. Thank you so much for your support, and keep looking up.